Let the stories carry you into sleep. They told us family means everything. But what if that belief was the very reason we stayed broken? Mr. Quiet had heard it since childhood. Blood is thicker than water. Family forgives, family stays. But staying meant swallowing silence. Staying meant pretending that certain words didn't bruise. That control wasn't control, it was love. And when you dared to question it, you were the ungrateful one. He didn't come from chaos. His house looked calm, holiday photos, Sunday dinners, but there was a quiet violence beneath it all. Love had a price tag. Emotions were kept in line with guilt. His younger sister, Miss Lien, learned early to perform her role, obedient, soft-spoken, agreeable. Quiet was different. He asked why when others obeyed. He didn't scream, he disconnected. And that terrified Aunt Rebecca, the matriarch, who clung to emotional loyalty like a shield. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But what if fate was just the family's oldest lie? It wasn't that Mr. Quiet wanted to leave, he just didn't want to disappear inside their script. And as he stood in the kitchen that winter morning, listening to Rebecca's voice coil guilt around every word, he realized something chilling. She didn't want him to grow, she wanted him small enough to stay. It didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, like a fog that numbs before it chokes. Mr. Quiet began to notice it in the way Aunt Rebecca said, "I love you," right before making a demand. If you really cared, you wouldn't go. If you loved this family, you'd stay. It was never shouted. That was the dangerous part. It was always delivered with a soft smile, a trembling voice, a sigh that sounded like sorrow but tasted like control. Miss Lien caught it first. She had tried moving to another city once, chasing a job she actually wanted. Rebecca didn't forbid it. She cried for days. And when Lien returned, it wasn't joy that welcomed her back. It was quiet satisfaction, like a puppeteer reclaiming her strings. Carl Jung called this kind of entanglement psychic possession, when someone else's pain embeds itself inside your choices, when their fear becomes your compass. And guilt? It wasn't just a feeling, it was the language of the house. Quiet began shrinking himself to fit Rebecca's comfort. Cancelled plans, bit his tongue, nodded instead of pushing back. And every time he chose peace over honesty, a part of him faded. He didn't even realize how much he'd lost until one Sunday afternoon when he overheard Rebecca on the phone saying, "He's finally coming around. I knew if I just loved him hard enough, he'd break." He wasn't bending to love, he was breaking beneath it. It wasn't just what Aunt Rebecca said, it was what she didn't say when Mr. Quiet started making choices she didn't script. He stopped going to church every Sunday. He turned down the safe promotion at the family friend's accounting firm. He started dressing how he liked, speaking more directly, even laughing louder than usual. And each time, the room got colder. Miss Lien saw it too. She'd once dyed her hair a soft lavender, barely noticeable in the sun, but the silence at dinner that night had screamed louder than words. Rebecca didn't need to punish with anger. Her disappointment was enough to make you erase yourself. Jung believed the journey of life was individuation, becoming whole, not just acceptable, but what happens when wholeness threatens the very identity your family built around your obedience. "You're changing," Rebecca told Quit one night. "No," he replied softly. "I'm returning." But in that return, he became unfamiliar. To them, different meant dangerous. Individuality was mistaken for rebellion. "You used to be easier to love," said Uncle Dean, shaking his head. Quiet realized in that moment, It wasn't him they loved. It was the version that played along, stayed small, nodded on cue. And for the first time in his life, he asked himself a question he couldn't unhear. If love only shows up when I disappear, was it ever love to begin with? Some wounds don't come from fists. They come from phrases sharpened into habit. After Mr. Quiet started living more freely, the family didn't scream. They corrected. You sure that's a smart move? Just trying to save you from failure. You're being too sensitive again. Uncle Dean mastered this kind of cruelty, the kind wrapped in care. His words arrived like help, but always landed like blame. Miss Leon once told him she wanted to start a design studio, and he chuckled, "Sounds risky. You're not really the resilient type, Leon." She didn't defend herself, she just stopped talking about her dreams. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of us we disown and unconsciously project onto others. Dean wasn't warning Quiet because he was worried. He was warning him because he had failed once and never recovered. His voice wasn't protecting Quiet, it was echoing his own regret. But the danger wasn't just what Dean said, it was that Quiet started to believe him. That inner critic began to wear Dean's voice. Every doubt sounded familiar. And worst of all, Quiet began to call it love. Because sometimes what's familiar feels like home, even when it's slowly undoing you. Then one night, after a family dinner, Dean pulled Quiet aside, smiled like a mentor, and said, "You're not built for that kind of life, son. Best to know your limits." And for the first time, Quiet didn't shrink, but something inside him whispered, "What if he's right?" Some people don't chain you with rules, they chain you with emotion. After weeks of silence, Aunt Rebecca dropped her newest line like it was casual. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Mr. Quiet didn't respond, but inside he felt the guilt burn like acid, shame disguised as duty. It wasn't the words, it was the history behind them, the birthday cakes, the school fees, the sleepless nights when he was sick. She listed them all like items on an invoice for his soul. Miss Leon had once tried to create space too. She got an offer in Seattle, her dream internship, but the night before she left, Rebecca cried herself into a panic attack. Leon stayed, and she never talked about Seattle again. Carl Jung said guilt isn't love, it's a tool, used by those afraid of losing control. But when you've been raised to believe that love means sacrifice, walking away feels like betrayal. Mr. Quiet wasn't trying to escape. He was just trying to breathe, but every breath that felt like freedom came laced with grief. Who was he without the guilt? Who was he if he chose himself? Then one morning, as he packed a small overnight bag for a solo trip, Rebecca stood by the doorway and whispered, "If you leave now, don't bother coming back." He didn't turn around, but part of him knew she wasn't warning him. She was testing if the leash still held. It wasn't the silence after Mr. Quiet left. It was the way no one even called to ask where he'd gone. He stayed in a rented cabin 2 hours outside the city. The air was still. Too still. Without the guilt, the judgment, the constant emotional balancing act, he expected relief. But instead there was a strange kind of ache, like he had left a war, but the battlefield was still inside him. Miss Leon texted him once. "You okay?" He stared at it for hours, never replied. 'Cause how do you explain missing the very thing that broke you? Carl Jung said the wounded inner child doesn't crave healing. It craves what's familiar, and sometimes what's familiar is the pain you were taught to call love. Quiet kept replaying old conversations in his head. Dean's critiques, Rebecca's soft demands. Every time he tried to rest, their voices returned, not as memories, but as beliefs. You're selfish. You're not strong enough. You'll regret this. And somewhere in that quiet, he realized the scariest truth of all. He hadn't escaped them. He'd internalized them. Then on the third day, as rain tapped against the roof, he caught himself reaching for the phone. Not to call home, but to apologize. He stopped, hand trembling mid-air, and finally asked himself, what am I sorry for? The strangest thing about healing is how lonely it can feel when no one wants you to change. 3 days after his moment of clarity, Mr. Quiet returned to the city, not to Rebecca's house, but to a small, sublet apartment in a quiet neighborhood where no one knew his name. No welcome home, no confrontation, just silence. Miss Lien stopped by once. She didn't come in, just stood at the doorway, eyes flicking over the boxes on the floor like they were evidence. I miss how things used to be, she said. But what she really meant was, I miss who you used to be. Quiet didn't blame her. When you've lived inside a system long enough, freedom starts to look like abandonment. Carl Jung warned us, when we individuate, we threaten the system that depended on our silence. Growth feels like betrayal to those who benefited from our smallness. Rebecca hadn't called, neither had Dean. But the absence was louder than words. It said, "You've broken the contract. You don't belong here anymore." He should have felt free. Instead, he felt unanchored. Floating in a new life with no map, no guide. Just the echo of people who once swore they'd love him unconditionally. Then one night, in that half-empty apartment, he found an old family photo tucked inside a book. Everyone smiling, arms linked. And for a second he couldn't tell if it was memory or manipulation dressed as love. Thanks for listening. If this story helped you unwind, don't forget to like and subscribe channel Reddit Stories to Fall Asleep too. There's a new tale waiting for you every night, right here. Sleep well.